Two Santa Cruz police officers killed on duty are laid to rest after a memorial that drew thousands from across California. A new record on Wall Street as the Dow Jones hits an all-time high. What could that really mean for Bay Area workers and Silicon Valley businesses? New state-of-the-art tunnels are making a dangerous oceanside highway safer, but some drivers could miss the heavenly vistas of Devil's Slide. And urban planner Stuart Cohen has some ideas for avoiding the nightmare ride to work known as the mega commute. Coming up next. Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Joshua Johnson. Let's dive into our roundtable discussion. Joining us tonight on the news panel are Paul Rogers, science and environment reporter for the San Jose Mercury News, Tom Vakar, consumer editor for KTVU News, and Martha Mendoza, reporter for the Associated Press based in Santa Cruz. Welcome, everyone. Yesterday, thousands of law enforcement officers came together in honor of Santa Cruz Police Sergeant Lauren Butch Baker and Detective Elizabeth Butler. They were shot dead last week by a suspect they were questioning about a sexual assault. The memorial was so big, organizers moved it to HP Pavilion in San Jose. Martha Mendoza, you were at the memorial. What's the main thing that struck you about this event?
Just the sheer tragedy of it, the loss for these families and for this community. It was just really a sad, sad day. It was shakingly sad. You know, there came a moment when one of the officers' partners picked up their son, 5-year-old Joaquin, and he had his mom's hat over his eyes, and he's holding a teddy bear, and you just see that this is a kid who's never going to have his mom again. And you know, her longtime boyfriend just said that he had promised her when he had seen her body that he would always take care of these kids. And then there were so many people who just loved both of these officers. This
was really kind of an unprecedented outpouring of grief for Santa Cruz. I mean, when they decided to move it from Kaiser Permanente Arena near downtown to HP Pavilion, it was clear they really weren't sure exactly what kind of a reaction they were going to get or just how deeply the community needed to grieve, to get this out of its system.
That's true, but this wasn't just the community of Santa Cruz grieving by any stretch. I mean, what happened at HP Pavilion was police from all over California came. I've never been around so many thousands and thousands of police officers, and everybody was there in full uniform to honor these two colleagues of theirs. And what one captain from Tustin, who had driven 400 miles up, told me was he and everybody else was just thinking, there, but for the grace of God go I. He said, you know, the investigation they were doing, same thing I've done hundreds and hundreds of times. Could have been any of us.
And, you know, I live in Santa Cruz, as Martha does. I live 2 blocks from where this happened. When I came home that night, there were SWAT teams around, there were schools in lockdown, there were helicopters in the air. And, you know, Santa Cruz is a small town. A lot of people know everybody. And this was the biggest event in Santa Cruz since the 1989 earthquake. Really has shaken the town to its core. And there are a lot of questions that people in the town are asking. The main one is, how could this sociopath, Jeremy Goulet, who murdered the 2 officers, how could he have gotten through so many times when he committed other violent acts? And you know, the 2 places that I've really looked at that are so troubling, he was arrested and charged with 4 felonies in 2007 in Oregon for trying to climb through a woman's window. Her boyfriend came out, he had a gun, he took shots at him. He was charged with attempted murder. He had 4 felonies, and the jury there let him off with 2 misdemeanors. He would still be in jail, but not for that. And then the year before that, he was in the Army in Honolulu. He was charged with raping 2 female officers in separate incidents, and the Army let him off with a dishonorable discharge and dropped the charges.
Do we know if the police officers that responded and were killed knew how seriously dangerous this guy was?
Initially, the police and sheriffs were saying, you know, they just didn't know. But subsequently, after a few days, they said that in their investigation of what these officers' case files looked like, they had found that indeed they did know that this person had a serious criminal history. They were going to investigate and actually ask him questions about a misdemeanor sexual assault case, and they actually were going to go try to hear his side of the story. What Paul was saying about his military history is interesting too, because former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta spoke at the memorial and said that he was troubled by the sexual assaults, troubled by the suicides he saw as Defense Secretary, and he said that in many cases the military looked the other way and didn't take them seriously enough. That was pretty great.
One other thing. I know these are well-trained officers, but when you have a shock to the system like this, is this likely to change the way policing is done in Santa Cruz now?
Sure. I mean, we're a town where, and I think Paul would agree, where you don't want the police showing up to ask your side of a story in a misdemeanor accusation. You don't want them pounding on the door with guns drawn and bulletproof vests. But there's no way the 92 remaining officers on that force are going to be taking such a casual, such a friendly approach. They can't. It's bound to change the way everybody in that town.
First time in 150 years that any officers have been killed in the line of duty in that town.
Although, let's be clear, part of the narrative of how this story has played out has been this wave of crime that's just swept over Santa Cruz, and this is the culmination of rising crime, rising crime. That's not really a fair perception of Santa Cruz.
It's been a lazy kind of reporting, often from out-of-town reporters. I've lived there for 24 years. I used to cover the Santa Cruz Police Department in the early 90s. And when you look at crime statistics, actually, there have been a couple of high-profile crimes recently, like this one. But 10 years ago, I just looked up the statistics. In Santa Cruz, there were 4 homicides. Last year, there were 3 homicides. There were 43 rapes 10 years ago. Last year, there were 33 rapes. 97 robberies 10 years ago. Last year, 83 robberies. The crime rate pretty much is the same. It bounces around a little bit, but Santa Cruz remains a very safe beach town, and I think that's why something this violent and this just shocking has really affected the town. And, you know, people will remember these cops 30, 40 years from now in this town. This will not go away.
But what shook people is how random it was.
Yeah.
And there's been a series of crimes that were just random and evil. So last year there was a woman walking down the street in mid-daylight who was stabbed by a mentally ill man.
Downtown business owner.
Yeah. Recently there was a woman at a bus stop who somebody stole her stuff and then shot her in the back of her head. So it's very arbitrary, and people are looking for a pattern. They're, you know, is it the homeless people? Is it the drug problem? Is it gangs? And as Paul, you know, went and looked into it, it's random evil.
It is worth noting that the city of Santa Cruz has a scholarship set up in honor of Sergeant Baker and Detective Butler, and the information for donating to the scholarship is on the city's homepage for people who want to continue to honor. I believe the effort raised, I think, $125,000 that downtown businesses pledged from the very beginning. So another way to honor the memories of these 2 fallen officers. Some positive economic indicators to end the week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average keeps breaking records. It closed today at another all-time high of 14,397. That's up more than 2% for the week, 10% for the year. Also, the Labor Department says national unemployment is down to 7.7%. California's employment numbers were supposed to come out today. They're coming out in 2 weeks. Tom Vakar, all of this looks good for the biggest businesses, the ones at the very top. Certainly hearing that the Dow is up and joblessness is down looks good, but all that glitters, you know, what does this really mean?
Well, it means that in ultimate terms that the economy is starting to gain traction, but it's still very slow traction. We do know that if you had the average amount of money that a person has in a 401k, about $77,000, invested in the Dow Jones Industrial Average when it hit its all-time high 5 years ago, today you have basically not made a penny. In fact, you've lost money because inflation, though small, has eaten up more than that. So you really have made no money on Dow Jones. And normally one would expect a return of 4 to 8% a year. So the stock market has a long way to go, but a lot more money is going into stocks because they seem to be paying better now than bonds and other debt instruments. So that's very important. That's one thing. Job growth is absolutely real. There's no question about it. Unfortunately, when the sequester really starts to bite, about 3 months worth of job gains, 250,000 per month or 750,000 will be lost. So unemployment will remain at the same level or increase just slightly in the United States if they don't settle this thing. And then finally, Are we likely to have a recession because of all this? And the answer is likely we will not have a recession because the underlying economy is grinding forward. But the bottom line is that while it is glittering, it is certainly not gold. We have a long way to go, and that's how bad this recession was. Most people, I think, still don't realize that this was about as bad as it gets, and certainly some people think it was as bad as the Depression.
Talk to us as a Bay Area workforce, whether you work in Silicon Valley or just work in the Bay Area, maybe not in the tech sector. I always kind of wonder about how what happens on Wall Street really lands on my street. What would we actually feel? Granted, we have some huge companies in the Bay Area who have a different relationship with the Dow components than we do, but for the Bay Area's economy, what might this mean?
Well, I think for the Bay Area's economy, it means one thing, and that is that as long as the economy has traction and people are buying things and businesses are expanding, then you have good news because they're going to need those goods and services, and that's great. The problem going forward, though, is that you have to make sure that you individually have the skills that are needed. For example, many people that work in the Bay Area environment don't have many skills, and in this society, that's brutal. Now, one of the big improvements that's taken place, and these are skilled workers, in construction. Construction is actually starting to grow after having been hit, losing more than 1 out of 3 jobs. So that's a good thing, but those are skilled workers that know exactly what they're doing, and even the people that learn to do that have to pick up a certain amount of skills. But if you're basically without skills, or you have skills that are no longer needed, you're out of luck in this economy here or anywhere else in the country.
You know, some of the numbers are pretty dramatic. 4 years ago, January, February, 2009, when Obama first took office, we were losing 800,000 net jobs a year in the United States. Like you say, the worst economy since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Last month, we gained 236,000. That is a million net swing. Housing is coming back. We've got corporate earnings all-time high. As you mentioned, the stock market, 4 record days in a row. How is this playing out? I mean, all the arrows just about, or many of the arrows are up. How is this playing out in the Bay Area, though? Are there parts of the Bay Area that are getting more of it than others? Sure.
I mean, Silicon Valley clearly is the shining star of the Bay Area's economy, but because housing prices have been so depressed, housing is doing well pretty much everywhere in the Bay Area, high end, middle, low end, because people are coming in. Now, one of the changes has been it's not just a bunch of people with a lot of cash coming in and buying houses on the cheap. A lot of people that are now actually going out and buying houses to live in, and a lot of people that are actually starting to put their houses on the market are people that own those houses who want to move up. That's the real driver of the future.
Interest rates are still low, right?
Interest rates remain low, are likely to remain low. Banks are a little more lenient about things. You still have to prove that you have an income, but it doesn't take you months and months and months, generally speaking, if you can prove what you can prove, to actually get a house or to actually buy property and things like that. So again, the economy is gaining traction. Northern California is doing better than Southern California, and we're doing better than the rest of the nation. But the reality is that if we can get this sequester thing out of the way, then the traction for the entire U.S. economy is likely to go forward, and that'll be good for the Bay Area because we supply so much of what the world needs.
Briefly, before we move on, what do you think is the biggest weak spot right now in terms of the Bay Area's economy?
I think the biggest weak spot in terms of Bay Area's economy would be some sort of a collapse somewhere else where our products and services weren't needed. For example, some big financial reversal in China wouldn't do us any good. Some big financial reversal on the Korean Peninsula, which is a real possibility, or in Japan, or a real bad spate, worse than it is now in Europe. Those kinds of things can hurt us because we are exporters of our goods and services to them.
We'll certainly keep an eye on it, and I'd be interested to see those unemployment numbers when they finally come out in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Caltrans is finishing up a new highway tunnel on the San Mateo coast. It's the first one built in California in 50 years. The Devil's Slide Tunnel south of Pacifica should provide a smoother ride to Half Moon Bay without the threat of landslides. Paul Rogers, what differences will we notice once this tunnel is open?
Well, you're not going to be able to see the ocean when you drive from Half Moon Bay to Pacifica. And, you know, the thing that's so interesting about this is it's an amazing engineering project. As you mentioned, first tunnel in 50 years built in Northern California, and I think all of California. I believe the third bore of the Caldecott, which opened in 1964 in the East Bay, was the last tunnel. This thing is 2 bores, about a mile long, 4,000 feet in each direction, $439 million project. They've been at it for 7 years now. I drive past it once a week, and I've been watching them chip away little by little. What's fascinating about it to me is that it's the culmination, really, of a nearly 50-year environmental battle. Right. I mean, the Highway 1 was built in the mid-30s, 1930s, around that corner. And almost immediately, by the 1940s, every time there was a big storm, rocks would come down, wash out the road. And by the 1960s, the early 60s, San Francisco developers proposed building tens of thousands of new housing units on Montara Mountain, on the hills behind Pacifica, the hills behind all the little towns there along the San Mateo coast. And Caltrans in 1960 drew up a plan for a 6-lane freeway that would have gone right over the top of Montara Mountain from Pacifica to the airport at Half Moon Bay. Environmentalists started fighting it. They got it slowed down in a lawsuit in 1972, and then Jerry Brown became governor. And he sort of stopped the project. It was stopped for a while. George Duke Meacham became governor in the 80s and cranked it right back up again. And as many folks may remember, the Sierra Club, Committee for Green Foothills, and others, in 1996, they finally won this battle with a measure they put on the ballot in San Mateo County, Measure T.
Yeah.
T for tunnel, they used to say. And it passed 74 to 26%. And since then, it took a while to get the money. But, you know, this project is one of the major environmental victories in the last 50 years on the Northern California coast.
And they've made it a real environmental project. So the walls on the outside, they actually took prints off of cliffside and then they rebuilt them there using artists who worked on the Indiana Jones sets. They're like
in
these really,
right?
yeah, these really intricate painted rocks that are supposed to look natural. They took all the dirt out of the tunnel and created a hillside that they've then planted over. And driving through them, going through them is really kind of a cool experience. They're slick and white and smooth inside. It's like an Austrian tunnel. And my concern, and it's probably irrational, is tunnels and earthquakes in California.
Now, as you wrote, though, in a fabulous story about this recently, this can withstand, what, a 7.5, an 8?
Yeah, just around there. 7.5 or 8.
I would certainly hope so, driving around that point.
Well, they have these pass-through tunnels, so if anyone's going to be going through them, they can know anytime you get stopped in there, and if there's an emergency, which God forbid it would happen, there's these tunnels that go in between the two tunnels that are fire-safe rooms.
And even lane to pull over.
Yeah.
They have carbon dioxide detectors. They have, I think it's nitrogen detectors, nitrous oxide detectors. They've got 16 fans that are gigantic that if there is a fire or smoke or toxic material, then they can blow it right out the tunnel, no problem. And it is a marvel of engineering, so much so that it actually has a separate blockhouse where as many as 15 people will manage that tunnel because it is that high tech. It's truly remarkable.
And the digging, right? They had to bring these machines that they use in Austria, like and as I remember you writing, Martha, this thing was well over budget. It was supposed to be 5 years and 240 million.
Yeah, it's
and it ended up as
7 years.
439. Why was it over budget? What happened?
You know, there's no way of doing a really good MRI, as it were, of a mountain. So they had a whole set for soft soil that they take out and a whole set for hard. And when they would hit hard, they'd have to come out and remachine with a new batch of machinery to take out the harder soil.
And this is close to opening, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very close to opening, and my favorite part is that they're not going to shut off that spectacular coastal trail. They're going to turn it into a bike route and a park, and having ridden my bike through that many times, it's going to be a thrill.
So I'm going to have to get my bike done. That was one of the, when I moved here 2.5 years ago to join KQED, that was one of the first drives I took. I did Devil Slide, and I was like, oh my God, this is the most terrifying. Would you look at that? Oh my God, this is the most terrifying. That's the most, oh my God. Yeah. So I'll have to get my bike out and take a look at it.
The Caldecott opens at the end of the year, the fourth bore of the Caldecott Tunnel, and then on Labor Day we have the Bay Bridge. This is the year of infrastructure.
Amazing. And California is alone in the whole country for this.
Very cool. Martha Mendoza, Paul Rogers, Tom Vakar, thank you. Speaking of the roads we drive, 2 reports came out this week that should be of interest to commuters. A quarter of all roads in California will be in failed condition, meaning damaged beyond repair, within 10 years. That's according to the recent California statewide local roads assessment. Another report from the Census Bureau says the Bay Area has the nation's highest share of what it calls mega commuters. Those are people who commute at least 90 minutes and 50 miles each way. One man who's working on solutions to our growing gridlock is Stuart Cohen. He's co-founder of the Oakland-based advocacy group Transform. Cohen recently won the Leadership Award from the James Irvine Foundation for his work on smart regional planning. Earlier today, Cohen shared his ideas for how we can stop building roads around cities and start building cities around people. Stuart, Cohen, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How did we get to this point? How did the Bay Area become the nation's leading region for mega commuters? What have we done wrong that no one else has done quite so wrong?
Well, about 50 years ago, like a lot of the rest of the country, we started designing our communities and our transportation system as if people would have to drive for every trip. And so we started putting homes very far away from where job centers are. And I think, we know what people want. People want a place where they can walk to activities and parks and shops and restaurants. And we've just engineered that out of a lot of people's lives. And the other thing that we've done is we've done a great job of protecting our open spaces, but we haven't done a good enough job of making sure where we are growing, we're providing homes for people of all incomes.
So we basically built the Bay Area to be the kind of place where you gotta drive.
That's right. And these mega commuters that we've been hearing a little bit more about are just in search, really, of affordable homes.
And it seems like people are in that search going farther and farther out. There are more and more places. One of the mega commute routes that was listed as one of the worst in the country in the census study was from Stockton to Alameda County. So they're just going farther and farther out until they can find a place to live. Yeah, and I passed a sign heading out past Tracy 10 years ago that said, drive another 15 miles, save $100,000. I didn't have my camera with me, but that drive till you qualify for a mortgage is part of this problem. And we've been focusing our transportation investments to accommodate that, spending billions of dollars on highway expansions, when all that's happening is we're just flowing more and more long-distance commuters in, clogging up the roads. And so we've got to get away from that pattern, and we're starting to. So what do we do? Well, so that's the question ahead, is how do we invest our transportation dollars and how do we grow differently? In terms of how we invest, we make sure that we're investing in existing communities and providing choices for people on how they get around. And so we are starting to put in more transit systems. We are starting to invest in bicycle safety and making it easier to have crosswalks. But we've got to accelerate that. And let me just we need more bang for the buck. And so in San Francisco, as an example, Muni is slowing down as cars clog up the city. If we can just increase the speed of the buses by 1 mile an hour, from 8 miles an hour to 9, we'll save $50 million a year on operating costs because you can do more trips. And we've got cars fighting with buses, fighting with Muni, fighting with taxis, fighting with everything else. I would imagine that some people would think in order for someone to win this fight, someone else has to lose. In order for you to gain, I have to give up. How do you keep all of those things in balance without making somebody feel like, oh, you're taking my roads away from me? It's a great question, and I think with transportation and with how we're growing, there's win-wins that we're not taking advantage of. One of the ones in San Francisco is going to be where we have really high volume bus lines, like the Geary line, carrying 50,000 people a day stuck in traffic or behind double parked vehicles. We give that its own dedicated lane. That will actually help attract even more people to it, and meaning less cars driving on the city streets and more people willing to go without even owning a car in San Francisco if you can depend on Muni, which right now you can't. There's also the matter of the fact that the Bay Area's population just continues to grow. More and more people want to be here. The jobs are here. The economy is good here. Where do we put all of these people, and how do we allow traffic not to create even more mega commuters? What do we do for the growing population? Right. Well, we have a tremendous amount of space in our urban fabric that we can build upon and even improve. The key thing is to really engage the community's values when you start to do that, and so it becomes a better place that could actually reduce the amount of driving. And how is that possible? Well, you take a place that has maybe vast parking lots and isn't that attractive, and then you just build up to the sidewalk so that people can enjoy a vibrant street life. And what happens is you actually create destinations that make it that people living nearby suddenly have a place to walk to or have a short drive to, instead of these long drives to everywhere we're going. So before growth and change is going to happen, we start by asking the community, what do you love about this place? We want to preserve that, but what do you need? And we've been going around the whole region doing that in communities from Antioch to San Jose. And
people say different things, but you can then offer that up as part of the planning process. And so in San Leandro, they wanted a child care center near the BART station so they can do a quick drop-off. They wanted safer streets. They wanted a better grocery store downtown, and they wanted some parks. It was included as part of the plan that came for their downtown, and what we saw was a huge embrace of that plan, and it's now being implemented.
Where do you think is the most ripe for beginning this kind of strategy?
So it's got to happen all over in the South Bay, where a lot of the jobs are going. We've got huge opportunities along boulevards like El Camino and in a lot of the wonderful downtowns that already exist in the Bay Area. It's really bringing back a lot of the type of growth that happened 100 years ago when you were just able to walk to your daily activities.
You took BART here?
I did take BART here.
And walked from the 16th Street
Yes,
16th
and it's
Street
a
station?
beautiful day to do it.
It is indeed. And you are part of the solution. Stuart Cohen, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it too.
Thanks to all of our guests for taking part, and thank you for watching. And by the way, daylight saving time begins this Sunday at 2 a.m. Make sure your clocks spring forward 1 hour. We leave you tonight with a look at some practice runs for this year's America's Cup yacht race on San Francisco Bay. I'm Joshua Johnson. Enjoy your weekend. Good night.